Hello, my name is Manny Pena, and today I will be talking about the regulation of the gastric phase of digestion. And I'm doing this for the medical physiology course through University of New England Online. So before I get into the gastric phase of digestion, it's important to define what it is and why we care about it. So this phase of digestion occurs after the cephalic phase. And the cephalic phase is one of the three phases that occur during digestion. And the gastric phase will follow that in a second. And the gastric phase has three main functions. The first one's for storage, to store our food in the stomach, It's for digestion, basically to break down the foods that we bring into our stomach and absorb all the nutrients. And then defense, to protect our stomach from potentially harmful substances or bacteria that could possibly go through the stomach. We'll get into them as we go on through the slides. And basically, the gastric phase is the period in which partially digested protein and swallowed food activates gastric activity in order to break them down. So it's stimulated in two ways. There is a stretching of the stomach, which then results in two different reflexes, which I'll get into later. And there's also some receptor stimulation in the stomach, which releases chemicals that we need to break down certain proteins and chemicals. So let's get into the storage of food. So as food travels through the esophagus, the stomach is initially relaxed, but as more and more food comes to the esophagus, the volume is increased as food comes in. And this happens in order to accommodate all the food that is in there. And this is known as receptive relaxation. It's important to note that as more and more food comes in, the absorption of the nutrients may be limited. So that's why it's important to not overeat and to make sure that we absorb all the proper nutrients. So food is stored under digestion, and it occurs in the upper stomach. And then food is pushed down to the lower stomach in the pylorus. And this is where food particles are then digested into a substance called chyme. And this substance is pretty frothy, and it's a substance that is made up when things are digested. So, getting further into digestion, gastric glands, or the parietal cells, they get stimulated, and they release a substance named gastrin. And gastrin, its main purpose is to promote the acid release in the stomach. And why do we care about the acid release? Well, the acid is going to promote a better environment for digestion. And I'll get into that a little more later, and how the environment will help enzymes actually operate and break things down with more optimal conditions. So the two reflexes that I spoke of earlier that are activated by stretching are two different ones. And one's a long reflex, and that's mediated through the vagus nerve and the brainstem. And the second one that we will get more into is a short reflex, which is mediated through the enteric nervous system. And this is the reflex that results in the release of gastrin-releasing peptide, which, as the name sounds, it releases gastrin, which then helps us release gastric acid. So getting further into acid secretion here, there are three main chemicals that influence gastric secretion. One of them is the acetylcholine, which you have seen repeatedly throughout the course. The second one is histamine, and the third one is gastrin, which I've already talked about earlier in the slides. So just a reminder, gastric glands, they release gastric acid, and this gastric acid then goes into the lumen of the stomach. So what this results in is a pH range of about 1 to 2, typically it's 2, but it lowers the pH in our stomach, and it keeps it at that level in order for us to have enzymes operate and food to be digested and broken down properly. So this then causes a release and activation of pepsin, which I will get into in this slide here, what it is. So all these chemicals stimulate parietal cells to secrete hydrochloric acid, which is a strong acid that naturally occurs in our stomach, and it helps promote the digestion. So pepsin is also released, and it mostly occurs in response to acetylcholine and gastrin. So acetylcholine stimulates the mucus secretion as well. And then going back into pepsin, pepsin is an enzyme that digests proteins, which then turns those proteins into amino acids and peptides, which then stimulates G cells. These G cells then secrete more gastrin, and it results in the positive feedback loop. So why is that important? That actually speeds up our digestion and keeps it going and going and going. So this is a positive feedback loop that our body needs and keeps going whenever we're eating food. So peptides are also, they serve as buffers. That's extremely important because if our acidity falls way below 1 or 2, we will then have parietal and G cell inhibition, which then results in a negative feedback loop. So that means our digestion is going to slow down as time goes by because we don't need any more pepsin or HCl because it's getting way too acidic. So also something important to note is the protection of the stomach. So acetylcholine, as I mentioned earlier, secretes gastric mucosa, and this gastric mucosa helps protect stomach lining. The reason, gastric mucosa is important is to protect the lining of our stomach and to make sure that acids or different substances don't irritate our stomach walls. If there's no mucosa, that can result in severe stomach irritation, and if there's too much stomach irritation, then that can result in ulcers that can then potentially hurt our stomach and then cause our stomach to bleed. And sometimes that requires surgery, and it is not good for the human body. So that's why it's important to keep all these components all together in order to form more gastric mucosa and then keep digestion going and going. Because if one is inhibited, then the other one is also inhibited. So, and one more thing, bicarbonate also helps to protect the stomach. And the reason for this is because bicarbonate can actually adhere or bond to certain ions to then form insoluble salts. So that'll help us get rid of some of the ions that our body does not need. So this concludes my slide for the gastric phase of digestion. Thank you very much.